might be one of my most controversial knitting opinions. Oh my god, can you hear that rain? Hi and welcome back to the Jodie Makes podcast. Today we're going to be talking about spring knitting plans. Hi, I'm Jodie and I am a knitter and crocheter based in the northwest of England, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what I'm hoping to be working on throughout the spring months. We have had a rare bit of sunshine in the northwest of England over the last few weeks, and that has gotten me inspired to start working on some warmer weather garments. Before we get into what I'm hoping to be working on, oh my god, can you hear that rain? So before we look ahead into what I'm hoping to achieve throughout the rest of the spring period, I did just want to take a quick look back at what I've managed to achieve since the last time I podcasted, and that does include a finished object. And that is my Lusk Tee by Rebecca Clow. As I mentioned in my last podcast, I have done a modification to put this sort of diamond star pattern on the front of it. It is just a plain t-shirt / jumper pattern, as well as doing the modification on the front to add the diamond pattern, which I haven't done on the back because I am lazy. I did also modify the sleeves, so this is a t-shirt pattern, but it does come with a separate PDF if you wanted to add sleeves to it and make it into a full jumper. I did originally follow the sleeves in the pattern, but I found them to be a little bit too tight for me. I think my gauge is slightly off from what the pattern calls for, and so I just did a straight sleeve with no decreases. So most of this I had already done in the last podcast. The only thing that I hadn't done was finish off the sleeves. I think I had ripped them back and restarted them. So since the last podcast, all I've had to do is just finish the sleeve length, add the cuff. I have washed but not technically blocked this. I don't tend to fully block my knitwear. I just wash it and then stick it on the radiator. Wash this, blocked it on the radiator. Quite happy with how the fabric has turned out. I do think I'm getting a little bit of bunching or a little bit of extra fabric underneath the arms, which I'm finding a bit interesting. So I haven't done many sweaters, if I'm completely honest. This is the first time I've done a drop shoulder where I've attempted bust shaping. Now what I did, because I've put a cable pattern on the front of it, is I did do bust shaping to increase out, but then I didn't decrease the bust shaping back out, and I just thought, because I wanted it to be an oversized sweater, if I thought about it, the way I like my jumpers to fit, I want them to lie flat, like across my upper chest to my bust, and then from there, if it's oversized, I don't mind it sort of draping out from there. So I thought, if I don't decrease the bust shaping back out, it's just going to increase the circumference a little bit, and I actually think that I probably, even though it was only a few stitches, I think that's probably what's caused that slight bulking there. So I don't think it's a problem with the pattern. I do think it's a problem with me having just not followed the instructions completely. In terms of the construction, it has got my favourite, in terms of the appearance at least, technique wise. I do prefer the short row technique, but I think you can't really beat that lovely seam line that you get when you do the increasing technique for the trapezoid on the back of a drop shoulder. I've done a double folded collar because I think on something that is like a sweater, I like the extra, I feel like it gives it a little bit of extra structure, but I also think it makes it look a little bit more professional as well. And I have done Italian bind off on the cuffs and hem, which I truly enjoy doing. The only thing I've not done, and why I'm saying it's a finished-ish object, is I haven't weaved in the ends yet. That's something that I'm hoping to do this week. I'm at knit night on Friday, and I tend to leave my sort of like knitting admin stuff for knit night, so stuff that I don't really want to do when I'm at home. So what I tend to do at knit night is swatching and weaving in ends. So yeah, really happy with it. Really happy that I went back in and modified the sleeves. Much happier with the sleeves now. If I was being really picky, I possibly could have done a little bit of decreasing towards the very end. They are quite wide at the end, but again, I'd rather them be too wide than too narrow or too tight. And I think they are a little bit shorter, but again, because I haven't done any proper blocking on this, I think with where this will continue to relax, if I still feel like they're too short in a couple of months' time, maybe I'll rip the cuffs off and add a little bit more length before next winter. In terms of stats, I did the size number 7 in the pattern, and I followed the bust shaping instructions for the D cup. I cast the project on the 1st of January. It was sort of a New Year, new cast on treat for me. and I bound it off on the 16th of March this year, which means it was on the needles for a total of 74 days. I tapped into 10 skeins, so I used 467 grams of yarn. 10 skeins tapped into out of 17, so I've got quite a bit of leftover yarn from this project. However, the yarn was a gift, so there was no yarn cost, and the pattern cost £5.95. I think I got that on the release sale. Rebecca does a really generous release day sale on her patterns, so I think they're normally £7, and I got that for £5.95, meaning the total project cost was £5.95. And I knit this out of Drops Fiesta in the shade Unicorn Sprinkles. That is my Lusk Tee by Rebecca Clow. So as part of my plans, I have some whips that I want to finish up, so I'm just going to quickly touch on those. So another project that I mentioned in my last video was my Yorkshire blanket by Nima Makes. And last time I came to you, I think I had 4 finished squares. So just to recap, those are the squares that I'd finished last time, and I have now finished a further 3 squares. So I've got this one, which is possibly my favourite one that I've done so far. I would love to take this same motif and put that into a garment of some description. I just think that that granny square is really, really lovely. So there's that square. I've also done this one, which is a little bit flowery, but I did have a look through all of the squares and I've picked the ones that I'm not going to do already. And there's this one as well, which has lots of puff stitches in. So yeah, I had 4 squares already done. I've made another 3, that's 7 in total. For my version of the blanket, I'm going to do 9 squares. So the blanket does have 12 different motifs, and the instructions in the pattern have you make each square twice. So you have a total of 24 squares. You do a joining method to join them all together, and then you put a border on, so it's a 24 square blanket. I'm making this as a baby blanket for my sister who's having a baby in, I think it's May that we're due. So I really wanted to make this a little bit smaller than the pattern suggests, so I'm just going to do 9 squares total and make it into like a little square blanket. So if I kind of hold the 3 squares together, it's going to be sort of that size squared with the border around it as well. So I think really nice, a really nice size for a pram blanket. She's not finding out the gender of the baby, as I mentioned in the last video. So we wanted to go for something kind of neutral. So I've got 4 skeins of Knitcraft Make the Change. I did have 2 skeins of this in stash and I went out and bought a further 2. I think I will need to tap into, so this is the final skein. The 3rd skein is on the go at the moment, so it took me more than 2 skeins to do the 7 squares that I've done. I think I'll get the last 2 squares out of the ball that I've tapped into and I'll probably be able to start doing the joining. I do think I am going to need this skein if I'm going to do the border in the same colour, but I've not decided that yet. What I want to do first is finish off all of these squares, seam it all together, tie in all the ends and stuff like that, and then just have a look at how the blanket looks at that point. And if it's starting to look a little bit too monochromatic at that point, then I'll consider picking up like a sage green for the border. That's the colour that my sister said if it's not going to be a single colour, she wouldn't mind it being cream and sage. So we'll have a look at that as we get a little bit more into it. But 3 squares done. These are quite involved, so they do take me quite a while, and I'm very, very much stuck to the pattern when I'm working on these, so it's not something that I'm making really, really quick progress on. But it doesn't need to be done till May. We're currently at the end of March, so probably got another sort of 6-7 weeks before I need to be finishing this up. So yeah, just need to quietly plod through that and we'll get that finished. So another project that I had started in the last video, that was a whip in my last video, what I'm calling my apricot inspired granny square cardigan slash jumper. And I don't think I had this much of it at that point. So what this is I'm going to put the inspiration picture in because there isn't a pattern for this. This is just something that I saw, a ready to wear garment, where I thought I can definitely make that. And that would save me having to buy a genuine crochet item from a retailer that's selling at a price that suggests that they definitely aren't paying their workers anywhere near a reasonable wage to crochet items for them. Now that I've got down off my soapbox, this is the motif from the actual garment. Now, one thing that I did realise quite quickly once I finished this first square, was that this square wasn't going to cover the same amount of my body as it does in the sample. So either the yarn that I've used is a little bit thinner and the gauge is a little bit thinner, or what's more likely, looking at the pictures, is that my body is a little bit bigger than the model's body. And I'm being quite generous when I say a little bit. I then had to improvise a little bit because I didn't want to compromise the look of, I really liked the fact that the front was just 4 granny squares, sort of 2 on each side. The back was just 4 and the sleeves were 4 as well. So I got to that point and realised that that wasn't going to be big enough, and so I just added a few more rounds. Now, what I did originally do was add another round of this sort of blue and white border. So it had another blue and another white. I didn't save the one square where I did that because I was still experimenting. So unfortunately I haven't got that to show you. But I found that that wasn't big enough either, and that I was going to need to add at least another round, maybe 2, to get them to a size that I thought was going to give me the dimensions that I wanted. So I ripped that out, and what I ultimately landed on was this. So I've got sort of the dimensions of the original square and this sort of beige stripe. So that's where the original square finished, and I've added 4 extra rounds. So I've done a beige, a white, a blue, and then a white again. So I've got this one that I've kept like this to show you, but I am going to add the 4 rounds in the colour sequence that I've come up with. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fully completed squares in the motif that I've decided on. Now, there is a consequence to what I've done there, because obviously in the original sample the squares are this big, and there's a square for the body, and then there's 2 squares for the sleeves. Now, because I've made the squares so much bigger, my body is going to finish sort of similar to where this jumper finishes, maybe a little bit further. So the drop shoulder is going to be a little bit more severe in my version. And what that is going to do, because the squares that are going on the sleeves are a little bit longer, is it's going to give me a longer sleeve just based on the 1 square alone. So what I'm thinking of doing originally, so that the inspiration picture, I worked out that that's going to have 16 squares total. So it's got 4 on the back, 4 on the front, and then 4 on each sleeve. So it's 2 long and 2 wide. I'm just going to do 12 squares, because what I'm thinking is, I think I'm going to need 2 for each side of the front. So 4 for the front, 1 for the back. And then I might get away with like a sleeve that's only 1 long, essentially. So still 2 sleeves wide, although that is going to give me an incredibly drapey sleeve, so we'll see. And just 1 longer. And then if that's a little bit too short, I'm just going to sort of extend, maybe with a striping pattern, maybe just with the white. I'll have a think about that when I get to the assembly point. If the sleeves are too drapey, I might want to keep it as like a 3/4 length sleeve, or I might want to do some sort of balloon sleeving, like use the extra striping that I'm going to do to it to cinch that sleeve in a little bit. Again, not too sure. Another thing that I'm not sure about just yet is, you may have noticed that I described this as a cardigan / sweater. And the other thing that I'm now thinking is, if I made this as a cardigan, because it's so open, realistically, how versatile a piece is that going to be in my wardrobe? Because if I've got to wear it layered over something, there's a few different colours in the pattern already, and you're going to be able to see quite a lot of what I wear underneath it. So there was a part of me that was thinking, maybe I also seam up the front and add some sort of collar and make it into a jumper rather than a cardigan. And I feel like I might get more wear out of it if I do that. But again, this is a really experimental piece, because I've definitely gone off piste when it came to the inspiration picture. And so I think I'm just going to see where it takes me at this point. I'm going to finish the 12 granny squares, try and seam it all together, see what I get, and then just go from there and see what works for me. And I'm making this out of Drop Spell in 3 shades. So I've got shade 1, which is the white, shade 3, which is the sort of beigey colour, and shade 15, which is the light blue. This is a stash project in that I had, I think, 4 skeins of the white in stash. I think I had 1 or 2.5 of the beige, and again sort of maybe 3 and a bit of the blue. I have had to buy more yarn though, because I did a little bit of maths and I figured that I was going to run out, so sort of semi-stash yarn there. And then I've got 2 new cast-ons since my last podcast that I'm hoping to take into the spring. So the first of the new cast-ons is, if anybody can guess, from a mohair stockinette stitch square. Like, points to you. This is going to be a cloud bow top by Reed Keys. This is from one of the spring editions of Pom Pom magazine. It might have been the last or second to last spring one. The one where it's all mohair garments. This came about because anybody that watched my last video might remember that I said I wanted to frog a cardigan that I'd made out of 2 strands of mohair. I said that I really liked the colour. I thought that the mohair yarn that I'd used was really soft, and I really just wanted to harvest that yarn and come up with another project. When I tried to harvest the yarn, I found it absolutely impossible to separate the strands. So one modification that I am doing with this pattern is that instead of knitting it in a single strand of mohair, which is what the pattern calls for, I'm actually knitting this with 2 strands of mohair held double. And one thing that I will say is I am waiting on a mohair brush to come through, because at the minute I'm not necessarily thrilled about the finish on this piece. I think you can tell it's a little bit lumpy bumpy, and I don't know if the particularly open gauge is sort of exaggerating that, but for me it's a little bit lumpy bumpy, and I feel like it doesn't look like new yarn. Obviously it's not new yarn, so I'm holding it to an unrealistic standard there, but I think you can tell that there's something up with it. And so I cast this on ultimately because I needed a travel whip, something that I could just throw in my bag that was easy to knit on for like train journeys and things like that. So I cast this on for a train ride, just as something simple to work on, and sort of finish the first square. And then I've just left it on hold from there because, again, I'm not necessarily totally thrilled with the way it's looking. So we'll see. This might turn into a cloud bow top. The other thing that I think is possibly slowing me down on this is I think I would really like to knit a cloud bow in like a light purple. I think it would just look really nice and springy. And when I think about when I would wear a cloud bow, I'm thinking that spring is probably its season. And is this, although I do like this colour, is this a colour that I'm wanting to wear in spring? Not sure. So yeah, a little bit concerned about the quality of the yarn now that I've ripped it out. I do actually have 2 untouched skeins of this from the original project, which I think would just about be enough in terms of yardage to make a cloud bow from actually new yarn. One thing I could do is risk it for a biscuit and cast it on with the 2 new skeins that I've got. Or the other thing that I could do is use the 2 new skeins that I've got and try and harvest a little bit of the recycled yarn from the original project and do the back panel in the lumpy bumpy sort of recycled mohair and knit it a single strand. And I think that might work better, but again, I'm sort of in experimentation mode with this at the minute, because there's also not really anything that I'd be able to do with those 2 skeins that are left over. So I really wanted to use this yarn. It felt like such a waste not to try and reuse it, but I think ultimately the garment that I have ripped this out of is possibly now destined for some form of recycling that isn't having the yarn harvested and reknit, which is a shame because it wasn't cheap and it's nice yarn, and I just made a really bad decision when I picked the pattern. But yeah, cloud bow top TBC, part of my spring plans, primarily because it's like a portable project and I am going to make a cloud bow. I just don't know that this panel is necessarily going to end up in the cloud bow that I end up making. And then the final new cast on that I've got to show you since the last time I podcasted is a camisole. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might recognise this to be camisole number, never gonna learn the numbers, camisole number 7. I feel like it's camisole number 7 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. This might be one of my most controversial knitting opinions, and I don't know that I will do a controversial knitting opinions video. I don't know if I could deal with the comment section, but My Favourite Things Knitwear, famously non-size inclusive. There's no tea here, by the way. This is just sort of my experience and my opinions. So my thing with My Favourite Things Knitwear is I find it especially frustrating because most of the designs that she puts out I find really, really nice. I think this is a really solid one. Before I found out about the size inclusivity thing and really clocked onto that, I had bought a couple of her other camisole patterns. I really like, I think it's 2 or 4, the other broken rib one, but it's 2x2 broken rib and it's got like a strappy cami strap. So I bought that one. I've made sweater number 15, and then I sort of clocked on to the size inclusivity thing, and I haven't really knit any of her patterns since, and I haven't bought any of them either. And then when she released, was it the first skirt pattern that she made? And there wasn't a lot of knitted skirts out at that point in my knitting journey, or at least I hadn't experienced many. I left a comment on her Instagram just saying basically that I wasn't necessarily happy with the sizing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with doing that as somebody who advocates for size inclusivity. Patterns that aren't size inclusive do tend to include my size, but I tend to be on the very upper end of the sizing, and I tend to have a lot of issues with gauge. And so for me, even if I wasn't necessarily bothered about size inclusivity from the view of wanting to include people in larger bodies, which is something that I am motivated to advocate for size inclusivity for, but even just as a personal maker, I find patterns that aren't size inclusive a bit more limiting for me, because if I want to muck around with the gauge, or if I struggle to hit the gauge, I've got very little wiggle room to continue to follow that pattern whilst also making a piece that fits me. And that's an issue that I had with sweater number 15. So I made the very largest size in that pattern, and I had a couple of gauge issues, and the sweater doesn't fit me, and there was nothing that I could do other than muck around with the yarn to try and meet the gauge to make that pattern work for me. All that to say, she released a skirt pattern, and I messaged her just saying, really love this design, but really disappointed to see that it's not size inclusive, to which I then got a response from her to say, if you buy the pattern and you provide proof of purchase and you provide your measurements, I will send you the numbers for your size. And I actually found that to be more irritating than her just saying, I don't really care to accommodate you, because for me that's very much, I can do the numbers and this pattern can work for your body type, but I'm not prepared to give you a tested version of the pattern, and I'm also not prepared to include you in the final sort of written instructions. And I don't agree with that business model. I think if you want the sales to people who are in larger bodies, you need to include people in larger bodies in your plans. And I don't think you pay the same price that everybody else does and I'll give you some untested numbers to make the pattern work for you is really something that's conducive to like a fair transaction. So yeah, that interaction just, I already wasn't buying her patterns at that point, but I think that response really just shifted the needle in terms of how far my opinion of her goes, certainly in terms of her business at least. So, controversial knitting opinion time. I think that when you are paying for a knitting pattern, what you are paying for is the work that's gone into working out the sizes, making sure that the numbers fit, sort of creating the design and getting the grading to a point where you can provide instructions to somebody to replicate that garment. So what you're paying for is the instructions. And in the same way that I saw a ready-to-wear garment and thought, I think I could make that, so I will. I also think it's fair game if you see a pattern that you really like and it does not include your size, I don't see anything wrong with having a couple of looks at the photos of that pattern and seeing if you can work it out yourself. Maybe that's morally questionable, maybe. And I do think as part of that opinion, I do think it's like I would only personally do that in scenarios where the pattern's not size inclusive. Again, maybe you don't agree with that, maybe you do, but I have been lusting after this top for ages, and I just thought maybe one day she'll go back and update all of the sizing and it'll be fine and I can knit them. But I am seeing more and more people make these, and every single one looks great, every single body shape that it's on. And again, this just adds to the annoyance, right? I have seen this on the very largest sizes that this pattern accommodates, and it looks incredible. And I don't see why like it's not particularly low cut, the straps aren't particularly thin, like there is no reason why this cami would not work on a larger body. So it's not like this design just isn't suitable for people in larger bodies. So yeah, all that to say, this is technically exactly like directly inspired by the cami number 7 by My Favourite Things, but I'm working it out myself because I really wanted this finished object in my wardrobe, but I did not want to support her business as somebody who goes out of her way not to be size inclusive. I've done the front 2 cups, I've started on the back, and I think in her pattern the back is slightly higher than the front, but I'm just going to make them both equal just to make the maths a little bit easier for me. So I'm just going to do the 2 back panels exactly the way that I've done the 2 cups on the front, and then join them and again just do the same sort of increasing that I had done. What I will say is that whilst I am happy to work this out myself and like replicate the pattern without purchasing it, I'm not willing to share any of my maths. I do think that that teeters over into sort of not quite copyright, because the copyright literally only covers the written word, but I think while what I'm doing at the minute is definitely morally grey and ambiguous, and probably some people would very much disagree with me, I do think I'm tiptoeing into territory that I'm really not comfortable with if I start sharing sort of numbers and things like that. But yeah, maybe start a conversation in the comments. Is this something that you think is fair game? Do you think that that's not really a fair way to treat the situation? Genuinely really interested to see where everybody else sits on that. I'm making that from Drop Saffron in the shade 72, which I think is called Clay. I would call this a white, but it's definitely more of a warm white, or maybe not even a warm white, sort of like an off-white, like a cool toned off-white. I do actually have 4 or 5 skeins of shade 17, which is like a true white in stash, and I was intending to make this with this originally. So I did 2 swatches in this. Yeah, I did one swatch on a 3mm needle, which is what's recommended in the My Favourite Things knitwear pattern, and the gauge was really open in a way that I was really not happy about. So then I re-swatched in a 2.5mm needle, and it's still really open in a way that I'm not happy about. And so finally I did cast it on using a 2mm needle, and I just thought to myself, if I'm going to go to the effort of knitting a camisole on a 2mm needle, like the amount of knitting that's going to involve, I just really want to make sure that it's something that I'm going to wear. And when I was thinking about this colour, I just think that it's maybe a little bit too white for my complexion. And I'd used the clay before, and I think if you just hold them together, it's really subtle. But I do think that that one is just slightly better on me. I am now up to a few different projects where I've bought brand new yarn. I think this is the 3rd project of the year where I have not used any stash yarn at all. I was allowing myself 4 of those. So to be at the end of Q1 and have made 3 purchases already, not where I'd like to be, if I'm being completely honest. But I think I am going to really enjoy this finished object, and I think that going for that colour is definitely the right move for me. So a couple of whips that I had in the last video that didn't come up in that section just there, I just want to quickly touch on. So the first one is the hood that I was making for my sister. Now, you may notice that this is no longer on a needle, and that is because I just got to a point with it. Well, first of all, I ran out of the mohair, and I used that as a moment to pause. So I'd originally intended it to go on the head like this, although now I'm actually looking at it, it probably could go like this also, and that would probably be a little bit longer. But ultimately, when I tried it on, again, this is the way I intended it to fit. it was not going to be long enough for what I wanted. And I think the way I did the shaping at the back, which was basically not to do any shaping, I knit a square and then I picked up stitches along the side. Again, this is just sort of freestyle. Picked up stitches along the sides, continued knitting across the live edge of the square that I hadn't cast off, and picked up stitches along the neck side. And where I've done that, there is quite a boxy corner. It's not like a rounded edge that you would possibly expect from a hood. It's a corner. So I probably should have done some short row shaping at the back. I don't know if you can see, it sort of sticks out. So I think I should have done some short row shaping at that point. And ultimately I just wasn't happy with it. And the more I looked at it, the more I just thought, I don't think my sister's gonna wear this. And the more I thought, I don't think my sister's gonna wear this, the less motivated I was to work on it. And so what I'm gonna do, unfortunately, is rip this out. But I've just taken it off the needles for now because I wanted to show you where it got to, because I actually made quite a bit of progress on it, like compared to where I'd previously gotten to. And then I just need to rip this out. The other project that I haven't yet mentioned is my Minot cardigan. Now again, if you watched my last podcast, you'll have heard that I had some concerns about the fit. The first thing that's putting me off this is it's a drop shoulder pattern, and in the pattern there is no short rows and there is no increasing. The back panel is a square, and so there's no shaping for the shoulders, and that's concerning me around the fit. I put it on hold because my sleeves on my Lust tee needed fixing, so I put it on hold while I fixed those. I've now since finished the Lust tee, and I have, I'm not going to say I've been making excuses not to go back to it, but I have not been inspired to go back to it. I finished the Lust tee, I continued working on my cloud bow top and my crochet cardigan thing, and I went on a trip this weekend just gone, and I thought rather than taking this, which is quite involved with cables, I'd cast on the camisole. And the further away I get from this, the more I think I'm just stalling on going back to it because I'm concerned. The other thing that's putting me off is it's written for a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair held together. I've done it in 2 strands of, I mean, it describes itself as a fingering, but I've heard people describe Nord as a sport weight, so slightly heavier. So this fabric is quite thick anyway, and then when you add in the brioche or the half brioche and the cables, this fabric is quite thick. And in my head, this was going to be like a spring light layer type cardigan, and the more I'm looking at the fabric, I'm thinking the shaping's not what I want, the fabric is thicker than what I want, and therefore it's going to be warmer than what I was intending for it to be. And where am I actually going to wear this? Because I think with the colour I possibly could wear it at Christmas, so make it a winter garment, but I don't really want to put all of the time into this garment to make it sort of like a festive season appropriate type garment. I did want it to be something that could live into the spring, but I'm not going to do anything to it for now. What I'm thinking of doing is swatching again with the cable pattern from the Minot cardigan, using the drops Nord in the red, but just holding it single, and seeing sort of how small a needle size I need to go to make this stitch pattern work on this yarn held single, and just see how I like the fabric. If I do like the fabric, then I will probably rip this out, measure the gauge on the swatch, and see if I can find another cardigan pattern that meets the gauge that I get with this held single, and recast it on in the lighter weight fabric. I think if I do that, I'll get a garment that functions in the way I expected it to. I think if I carry on with this, I think I'm going to be disappointed. And the other benefit of doing that is that I can look for a pattern that meets the gauge of this held single, that also has some sort of shaping in the back that can help with the shoulder construction. Because the more I look at it, the more I'm thinking, I think I'm stalling on it because it's complicated and it's time consuming and it's laborious. But I think the main reason why I'm stalling on it is because it's complicated, time consuming and laborious, and I'm not convinced I'm going to love the finished object. Whereas like the cami, time consuming, was a bit fiddly to get going with, laborious, because it's sort of the broken rib stitch on 2mm needles. However, I'm really, really motivated to work on this because I know I'm going to love this finished object. So that was like the first thing for me, like time consuming, complicated and laborious isn't necessarily a turn off for me. And so if I'm not reaching for something, like even if that's at play, the first thing I'm thinking of is, am I actually going to want this finished object? So I'm keeping this on ice for now. I do have some aspirations to potentially come back to it, but I think I want to rework it first. So that's everything that I've either finished or that I'm actively working on or that I have been actively working on previously. Now I'm going to talk about some actual plans in terms of things that aren't currently on my needles that I'm thinking about. And I wanted to start with some honourable mentions, so things that I've looked at and I thought I really would love to make those this spring. They're very spring appropriate, they're something that I'd like to be working on, but ultimately they haven't made the final cut. And the thing at the absolute top of this list is the Apple Flower Sweater by Clara Eggers. Everybody's talking about this at the minute. It's from the liner 52 Weeks of Sweaters, I think it's called. It's knit using a worsted weight yarn on 5.5mm needles at a gauge of 18 stitches by 20 rows, and it ranges in size from 86.5 centimeters to 173.5 centimeters, and it recommends 10 to 15 centimeters positive ease, so really nice and size inclusive. One thing that I did think about this, and again, like you're gonna see a theme of, I really, really like DK and below in terms of the weight of a garment. I just think they're more practical for me when I think about how warm I run and what temperature I like to be at. Anything above a DK really is getting a bit warm and impractical for me to wear. Because it recommends itself as a worsted weight pattern with that 18 stitch gauge, one thing that I was thinking is I would love to try and cast this on in a DK weight just to see if I could get a lighter weight garment and maybe muck around with the sizing to get something that's going to fit me at a slightly lighter weight. Again, this is why I like really size inclusive patterns, because it gives me the flexibility to do that. There is one yarn in my stash that I think would work really nicely for this, and that is, I think this is Drops Daisy, in the sort of like cerise fuchsia pink colour. I've got 3 skeins of this, which I originally bought to make a hat, and I haven't done yet, and I've just got the 3 skeins. Gone off the idea of making a hat. 3 skeins isn't enough to do much, but it is enough to do some colour work. And I saw a really nice sample, or like a shade chart, that had like a bright pink, a lilac-y sort of lavendery purple, and a cream or a lighter pink as the sort of colours for it. So the bright pink being the flowers, and then the stripes being sort of either the lighter pink or the white with the purple. And that's the sample that I want to make. However, the reason why this is just an honourable mention rather than a solid plan is I've got 3 skeins of this. I would have to buy quite a bit of yarn to finish making that project. And by the time I've finished making that project, it's not going to be seasonal. So I'd be finishing the project coming into sort of height of spring, summer. And so for now, like, I haven't got all the yarn, I haven't got the pattern. It is definitely something I want to make. It is definitely something I want to make in the colours that I've just mentioned. It's just not something that I want to commit to this spring. On a similar vein, there is the Flow Skirt by Moon Chain. Now this is a made to measure pattern. It's intended to be worked up using a DK weight yarn on a 4mm needle, and the gauge for that is 10 stitches and 10 rows. And similar to the Apple Flower Sweater, the only reason that this isn't a solid plan is because neither the pattern nor the yarn are stuff that I have in stash. So I would need to buy a whole new project worth of materials and the pattern. So it's just not going to align with what I'm looking to do this year. But love this pattern. It's been on my to make list for at least a year at this point. So it is definitely something that I want to make. And I think I want to make it out of the recommended yarn, which is Drops Bell. When I think about the colour that I would like to have this in, I see it in a black. However, I am moving away from darker colours, so that's another thing of like, right now I'm not necessarily settled on what colour I would want. And I see that Drops are releasing new colours of Drops Bell all the time. So really excited to make this, just not one that I'm going to get to this season. The next pattern on the honourable mentions list is the Mara Blouse by Sophie Hemmings. I don't have any stats on this. I know it will be size inclusive. I'm pretty sure that it's available in, or it will be available in DK and 4-ply. And the reason why this hasn't made it onto the plans is this pattern has not been released yet. However, we talked about the sort of my favourite things knitwear thing a little bit ago. When she released blouse number 1, that was another one of those patterns where I was like, really wish that I was happy to buy non-size inclusive patterns, because I love that piece and I would love to make it. I've waited and similar designs have come out. I was considering I think it's called the Ivy blouse by Petite Knit. Don't make a lot of her patterns either, but that one I thought was similar enough to the blouse number 1 that I might get the intended look or the original look using a different pattern. And then I saw that Sophie had released this one, or was in the process of releasing this. I saw the test call. I didn't apply for it because I'd already sort of committed to a couple of other things that I wanted to get done first. And so the primary reason why this is an honourable mention is just because the pattern's not out yet. And then a couple of crochet patterns that I've seen. So the first one was the Zip Up Crochet Bomber by Beth Povey. That comes in sizes extra small to 5XL. There was no ease recommended in the pattern, and it's intended to be worked up using an Aran weight yarn on a 6mm hook. The main reason why this one didn't end up on the sort of the final list, so first of all, same problem as a couple of the other ones. So I didn't have the yarn and I didn't have the pattern, so it would have been a totally new project's worth of materials into my stash, which I'm trying to minimise this year. It's also got a zip, which I've done a zip before. I struggled with it, and so in terms of the complexity, that's something that I wanted to consider. And I also just wanted to think about my sort of spring summer wardrobe a little bit more holistically. And when I think about that, a jacket just isn't a priority for me at the minute. I think the things that I really want to prioritise are garments for my top half, so like tops and jumpers and things like that, and outer layers aren't really something that I am in massive need for right now. Love this pattern, definitely want to make it, just not going to get around to it this spring. And similar, I would say that this is probably the top of the honourable mentions. So out of all of the honourable mentions, if any of them is going to sneak into sort of aspirations or even sort of firmed up new cast on plans, this would be the one. That is the Tulip Stitch Flower Garden Vest, again by Beth Povey. Again, comes in sizes extra small to 5XL, and this is again meant to be made in an Aran weight yarn. However, this time works up on a 5.5mm hook, and this one does have a sort of more traditional gauge of 14 stitches times 6.5 rows for every 10 centimeters. And the reason why this one hasn't made it any further up the list, so there's two reasons. So both of the Beth Povey patterns advertise a size range of extra small to 5XL, which on paper looks quite size inclusive because there's 9 different sizes, but there's nothing on the pattern to tell me what those sizes actually equate to in terms of actual sort of bust circumference. So there is a limit on how exclusive they can be because there's 9 sizes. So it's going to have to be inclusive up to a certain point. You know, there's only so much you can take out of a vest sort of incrementally that's got that sort of pattern to it and still make it make sense. But I would like to see the actual sizes on the pattern. So because I haven't had a time to sort of message her and say, hey, you've got this pattern, it says extra small to 5XL, but what does that actually equate to? I've seen that, I think somebody's messaged on the pattern to say like the exact same thing, sort of like, you've advertised extra small to 5XL, but what does that actually look like in terms of sizing? That was one thing that put me off. And then the other thing was just, again, not quite as high up the list as some of the other things that I'd seen in terms of preference. So it just got pipped out by a couple of things there, but still really love that pattern. Think it would really work in my spring and summer wardrobe, but not something I see myself getting around to this spring. In terms of aspirations, so the first thing on my aspirations list is to get back to the Minnow cardigan. And so I would really like to finish off all of my whips, finish off all of the things that I am definitely going to be casting on, and then come back to this and sort of either finish it off as it is or rework it as I've explained. The next thing on my aspirations list is the Knosty Tee by Rebecca Clow. Now again, similar to the Sophie Hemmings pattern, this one's not out yet. However, I believe this is supposed to be launching, if not this month, then maybe next month. Maybe it's the month after, maybe I've gotten this completely wrong, but I saw the test call go out for this not long ago. I applied for it and didn't get into it. I know that I want to use this Drops Belle in the navy shade. This is yarn that I bought to make a crochet dress from a couple of years back. It took me so long to finish the crochet dress that I had changed dress sizes by the time I finished it. And so I unravelled the dress immediately because I knew that it would just sit in the naughty corner inevitably if I didn't do that. So I've got a ton of this. I've used some of it up throughout sort of the 2 years that I've had it in stash, but I've definitely got enough in stash to make, I think, even a long sleeve Nosty tee. And again, I just think that that's something that would fit into my spring summer wardrobe better. I have actually made a crochet mesh top that I think when I made it, the Nosty tee actually looks like what I was expecting I was going to get, and I just didn't really have the design skills within crochet to come up with something that would look like that, and it's actually a lot more open than I was intending it to be. But I think this yarn, Nosty tee, really excited to make that, and I think that's pretty high up on my aspirations if I finish some of the other bits on there. And then the next thing on my aspirations, so things that, again, if I finish all of the things that I am really set on doing, I would go to. There's sort of 3 patterns and they all fit into the same sort of category. So no one of these patterns beat each other out. It's just which one I'd prefer to cast on when I get to it. And that is I think it's called the Astray Top by Megan Horton. This one comes in sizes 71 to 177.5 centimeters, and it recommends 0 to 2 centimeters of positive ease. It's worked up using a light fingering weight yarn on a 2mm needle for a gauge of 30 stitches by 35 rows per 10 centimeters. The other patterns that are in this list are the Four Seasons Camisole by Celine Phaeton. The Four Seasons Camisole comes in sizes 58 to 145.5 centimeters, and the recommended ease here is 10 to 20%. I think it's got negative ease actually. So I think she says take your bust measurement and times it by 0.8, and then that will give you the intended ease. This is worked up on a fingering weight yarn on 2.5mm needles for a gauge of 33 stitches and 44 rows per 10 centimeters. And the final one in this category is the Petal Drop Camisole by Florence Miller. That comes in sizes 75 to 155 centimeters and recommends -6 centimeters of negative ease, so -6 centimeters of ease. Designed to be worked up on a fingering weight yarn on a 3mm needle for a gauge of 27 stitches and 40 rows. Apologies if I was looking there quite heavily throughout that section. All of my notes are on my laptop just here. All of these patterns fit into the category of I would like some new camisoles for my sort of spring summer wardrobe, and these are all the camisoles that I'm really interested in making. Now for these camisoles, I've got 2 different shades of Drops Saffron in quantities that would be large enough to make a camisole in. So I've got the shade number 9, which is the navy blue. I think I've got 5 of these, and I've got 4 in the shade 4. So 2 camisole quantities. I would like to do 2 of those 3 patterns. I just don't know exactly which 2, but those 3 patterns are like the ones that I'm really keen to make like these things into, and I would really like to be going into the summer with some of these camisole quantities worked up. So they're not the highest priority for me, but they are definitely sort of the 3 patterns that are fighting out to be what I knit these 2 yarns from. I think in order of preference I'd probably go for the green first and then the navy blue second, and I think either the Four Seasons or the Petal Drop Camisole would be what I work the green up in. So that's where I'm currently at, but those ones are like slightly higher up the list. They're not just patterns that I'm interested in, they're ones that I'm interested in making really soon. But when I looked at some of the other things that I've got on my list, when I added a bit of realism to what I was considering, I just didn't think that it would be possible to get through everything that I've already sort of set myself on, plus an extra 2 camisoles. And then finally, I've got 3 patterns, or 3 projects should I say, because not all of them actually have sort of designated patterns to them, that I am definitely going to be casting on in the spring. The first one is a crochet beach bag. Now again, this isn't a specific pattern. I've seen loads and loads of inspiration pictures on Instagram, and the 2 options that are currently tying for me are this sort of scrappy granny square, and I'm going to put some inspiration pictures on for you so you can see exactly what I'm looking at, but sort of a scrappy granny square beach bag. Or the other style that I've seen, which is probably what I'm leaning towards most because I've got the yarn sort of available ready to go, is this sort of like black and white stripy type of granny square bag. And I've got a black and a white in the drop saffron. I think I've got 4 balls of this and 5 balls of this. That black and white one I think is probably winning out just in terms of I've got the materials, and again I'm sort of moving away in terms of colours. These sort of like really stark whites and stark blacks, I don't think they're colours that necessarily suit me the best. And so I'm trying to move away from making garments in these things, and when we're talking about sort of like fingering weight items, these are going to be really time consuming to work up into like a camisole, which is probably what I intended to make out of them when I bought this yarn. But I think that a black and white sort of beach bag would be a fairly neutral piece that I would potentially get use out of, but even if I didn't get use out of it, it's something that I could definitely sort of pass on to somebody else. So first firm new cast on granny square beach bag. The second pattern that I am definitely going to be casting on in spring is the Salty Days sweater, and when I bought the extra dropped bell for my sort of granny square cardigan jumper, I noticed that dropped bell was on offer, so that was really helpful for me because I needed to buy that for that project. But I thought whilst it was on offer, I would get the 10 skeins of it that I needed to make the Salty Days sweater as well. So I do now have the yarn for that. That is the third project that I have bought new yarn for this year, and that's definitely going to happen, which I'm really pleased about because that was something that was on my make 9. The Salty Days sweater is a pattern by Veronica Lindberg. It comes in sizes 100 centimetres up until 197.5 centimetres, and it's intended to be worn with 15 to 20 centimetres of positive ease. It's originally worked up in a DK and a lace weight held together on 5mm needles, and it's worked up at a gauge of 17 stitches by 24 rows per 10 centimetres. I'm hoping to work this up in dropped bell, so again I think I'm going to have to do some gauge jiggery pokery with this. What I think I'm going to try and do is try casting it on a 4.5mm needle just to start with and just see how the gauge looks from there. If it's too loose, I'll probably have to drop down to a 4, which will make my gauge significantly smaller than the intended gauge, I would imagine. But I could always mess around with the sizes to account for that. But I'm really, really keen to cast it on using a cotton, mainly because the primary reason why this sweater ended up on my wish list, I've seen a few people make it in the sort of DK weight wool and mohair that it's designed in. But last year I saw the version made by AKA Nora Knits in sort of like I think it was the KNC cotton. Really, really inspired by Nora's version. Think that a white would be the right sort of colour for this. You probably won't even be able to tell on camera. This is an extremely stark white. This is like the colour of a piece of printer paper. The dropped bell, whilst it is technically the same shade, it is technically like a true white, it's just the littlest bit softer. And I don't know what's making me think that that is better than that, but I do think it's very subtle, but they are slightly different colours to me. It probably still isn't my best colour, but I just really like I think there's something different between a white camisole and a white sort of long sleeve top. I don't know, can't justify it, but definitely going to do it in this yarn. And then the final definite new cast on, and thank you if you're still around here because this is going to be an ungodly long video at this point. I am going to make a garden party top by Rhonda, is it Yerxa? Rhonda Yerxa. It's worked up on an Aran weight yarn. I've recorded a 4mm needle, but I think I've got that wrong. It's probably more like a 6, because the gauge is 15 stitches by 24 rows for every 10 centimetres. Now, I'm going to hold up Drop Saffron, which is the yarn that I want to make this out of. This Drop Saffron is not an Aran weight yarn. Drop Saffron is a fingering weight yarn. And again, this is another pattern where love that it's size inclusive because I want to muck around with the gauge. So what I was thinking was I would really, really like to make it in a fingering weight. I just think for me in the summer, the type of weather that I'm wearing these garments in, a fingering weight garment just makes so much more sense for me. I just prefer them. So I'm going to swatch for it in a fingering weight, see if the sizes in the pattern go large enough to accommodate that. If not, I can hold this double, get a DK weight, and I'm pretty confident that there will be a size in this Aran weight pattern that will accommodate a DK weight. I'd prefer to work it up at a fingering weight, but I accept that DK is possibly a little bit more realistic. But really, really like this top. I think it's going to be really fun in this super bright pink, and can't wait to make it. So that's everything that I've got for you today. I would love to hear what your plans are to be making this spring, and I'd love to hear some feedback on some of the things that we've discussed today. So specifically around the camisole number 7, do you think that what I'm doing is a little bit wrong there? Do you think that I am morally questionable in my decisions? Or do you agree with me? Do you think that it's absolutely fair game if a maker is choosing, or a designer is choosing, to exclude people in larger bodies or even people in smaller bodies? Size inclusivity goes both ways, right? If we've got a designer who's choosing to exclude any part of the community based on size, do we as makers have the right to treat the garments made by that designer the same way that we would treat many ready-to-wear garments? I see so many makers on the internet who are perfectly happy to look at, and even designers who are perfectly happy to look at a ready-to-wear garment and use that as the inspiration, or make a direct copy of it and even sell a pattern. So I do think that there's a lot of this practice already in the knitting community. I think that my method maybe just pushes it a little bit to the extreme. So I'd love to get your feedback. Do you think I am overthinking things with the new cardigan? Do you think I probably like it just as it is, and that I just need to sort of commit to it and get it finished? Would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much if you stuck around. I know that this has been a bit of a long one, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye.